I hooked up without protection at my husband's work party. He found out and exposed me publicly. I don't even know where to start with this. Looking back, it feels like my entire life was building up to the one mistake that ruined everything. It wasn't like I wanted any of this. It wasn't what I signed up for. What happened because I was completely blindsided by a man I thought I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. It wasn't all my fault. Growing up, I was the type of girl who spent more time daydreaming about her future kids than her wedding day. Sure, I wanted to get married, but the picture in my head always had kids in it. I had a pretty large family, and I'd always wanted that for myself too. The marriage part just felt like the step you had to take to get there. So every boyfriend was interrogated and eventually weeded out. I know I probably came on way too strong when I asked if they wanted kids on the second or third date, but I really just didn't see any point in drawing things out. If they didn't want kids, then we weren't compatible. That was that. Why should I waste my time on someone whose goals didn't align with mine? My mom had raised us with nothing but love, and she always made it seem like having kids was nothing but a blessing. So that was what I grew up believing. I didn't want those awkward, undefined relationships where no one knew what they wanted or where they stood. I wanted stability, someone I could raise children with, someone who actually wanted to build a life with me. But of course, the men I dated didn't exactly fit that mold. My 20s were a string of disasters, if I'm being honest. There were the guys who pretended to want something serious just to get what they wanted, or the guys who were nowhere near where they wanted to be in life or where I needed them to be. Almost every relationship ended the same way, with me realizing that I wasn't going to get what I wanted and them painting me as needy or strict because I dared to have expectations. After enough of that, I started telling myself that if I hit a certain age and I was still single, I'd just do IVF or adopt. I decided that I wasn't going to let a man's indecision keep me from being a mom. That was where my head was at when I met Derek, and meeting him changed everything. We met at a mutual friend's dinner, and he sat across from me. He was pretty quiet and to himself at first, but the more we talked, the more I felt interested and attracted to him. He was ambitious without being arrogant, and funny without being over the top. A good listener, too. That shouldn't be rare, but it was. He had his life together in a way that I admired. A good job in finance, close to his family, careful with money, all of that. For once, I didn't feel like I was risking it all and hoping the guy would get better with time. He was already the man I'd always been hoping to meet. It was a bit forward, but I was already picturing myself starting a life with him. He ticked all the boxes. We started dating and it just worked. And when the topic of kids eventually came up, he didn't shy away from it. He didn't make excuses or lie. He told me he wanted them too, that he couldn't wait to be a dad someday. Hearing that was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. Nowadays, it seems like every guy is running away from starting a family or handling some responsibility. But Derek wasn't like that. His response made me feel I wasn't asking for too much. I had finally found someone who wanted the same future I did. We got married almost 2 years into dating, and the first few years of our marriage were everything I could have asked for. We just matched each so well. We wanted the same things and thought the same way. It genuinely felt like I'd found my other half. And he didn't avoid the difficult or less comfortable conversations. We were free to talk about details like when to start trying or how many kids we wanted, all those things. We were on the same page, or at least I thought we were. He told me he wanted to wait a little, like a few years into the marriage, just so we were more settled, and that was fine. I wasn't in a rush. I believed him when he said we had time. But then the years passed. 1 turned into 2, 2 turned into 3, and before I knew it, 5 years had gone by, and we still hadn't started trying or making any plans to. I was still on birth control and slowly approaching my 40s. I had been patient, and I had given him the space and time that he said he needed after we got married, but every time I brought it up, every time I circled back to the idea of starting a family, Derek shut me down. He'd tell me he was too busy with work, that his schedule was insane, that we should just enjoy being married a little longer. At first, I accepted it. I wanted to be understanding and a supportive wife, not come off as too strict or in a rush like I'd been accused of being by previous partners. But after years of waiting, it started to feel less like patience and more like rejection. It hurt in ways I didn't expect. I wasn't just frustrated, I was also scared. scared that maybe he had changed his mind or maybe he didn't see a future with kids in it anymore, at least not with me. I tried to map out my fertile days, show him that it was the perfect time and that we could make it work, but again, he brushed me off every time. He'd get irritated and tell me he didn't need a calendar shoved in his face, that things at work were too stressful right now. Work became the excuse for everything. Derek had gotten this big promotion, and suddenly his life was all about meetings, deadlines, and long hours at the office. I tried to tell myself that was the reason, that his strange behavior and constant avoidance of the topic was just about his career. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more, that there was something he wasn't telling me. And then a few months ago, I found out what it was. He hadn't just been too busy with work. He'd been keeping a secret from me, one that was so much worse than anything I had imagined. Honestly, I should have suspected it from the beginning, or at least have known that it had nothing to do with me. It all made sense when Derek came home late one night. He practically stumbled through the front door after yet another work party, which he kept getting invited to after the promotion. I was already on edge, pacing the living room because I couldn't sleep since he'd been out for so long. He was a complete mess, totally drunk and all over the place. If not for the fact that there were no scratches on him, I would have thought maybe he'd been in a car accident on the way home or something. That's how terrible and messy he looked. He would have never let his coworkers or his buddies see him like that. I knew then that he had probably gone to a club or bar to get even more drunk after the party. And that made me feel livid. For years, I'd swallowed my frustration, told myself that he was just busy, that work was demanding, and that I needed to be patient. But that night, I really just couldn't take it anymore, and something inside me snapped. I asked him why he had time for parties, but not for me. And I asked why he thought he could just drink with his colleagues and go to bars until 2 a.m, but couldn't sit across from me for an hour to talk about our life. I couldn't understand why he kept shutting me down whenever I mentioned the one thing I had always wanted and what I thought he wanted too. I was disappointed and I was angry. I made sure to let him know that. Derek was drunk and his guard was down. If I had been paying attention to anything other than how upset I felt, I would have noticed how broken he looked that night, how defeated. For the first time in our marriage, he didn't try to smooth things over or change the subject. He snapped back, and in his anger, he finally told me the truth. It had never been about work. He admitted that 3 years into our marriage, he'd finally gone and gotten tested for something he'd always suspected, and the results were bad. His sperm count wasn't just low, it was practically non-existent. He'd been tested before when he was younger, and the results hadn't been great then either, but he'd convinced himself it would improve with time, with diet changes, and with supplements. But when he went back again 2 years ago, the results confirmed what he had been so scared of. There was nothing he could do. He wasn't capable of giving me a baby. There was no diet or no pill that could change that. I remember standing there in shock for I don't even know how long. His confession had knocked the wind out of me. All the nights of begging and the arguments where I thought I was pushing him too hard, all the times he brushed me off with a weak excuse or something related to work, it was all because of this, because for 2 years he had known and never told me. The anger that I felt in that moment was like nothing I had ever felt before. It wasn't just that he couldn't give me what I wanted, it was that he had lied to me for years and let me believe that someday we would get there. He had known the truth the entire time that I carefully tracked my cycles and I counted down the months and years. My entire marriage felt like it had been built on a lie. He hadn't even ever told me about the tests he had taken when he was younger. This whole time I thought that he was different. I thought that we believed in the same things and had the same values, but he was just like the rest, lying to me to get me where he wanted. And now I was trapped in a marriage to a man who had been lying to me for close to a decade. So obviously we fought. It was loud and ugly, and a lot of shit was said. I screamed about betrayal, and I went on and on about how selfish it was of him to keep this from me and practically rob me of time when he knew my dream. But he yelled back about the shame that he had felt, and about how he didn't want me to see him as less of a man, which was understandable, but still didn't excuse what he had done. And we never settled things. He never apologized or even acted like he was in the wrong. We both went to bed, separate beds, pissed off with each other. The weeks that followed were unbearable. I couldn't look at him without getting angry, and he avoided me so we wouldn't fight again. I also couldn't forgive him since he had never actually apologized. Neither of us said anything about divorce, even though kids were a hard deal breaker for me. I knew in theory there were other options like adoption, donors, surrogacy, but none of it mattered because the trust between us was practically gone. It felt like I didn't know who I was married to anymore. Of course, I still loved him. That didn't just go away, but I didn't know if I could ever forgive him or trust him again. And then one night, he finally came to me. I was in our room. I had practically been living in it alone since the fight while he took the guest bedroom. I wasn't really in the mood to talk because I knew it could lead to another argument, so when he walked in, I didn't even look up at first. Then I heard him sigh and he said he was sorry. Sorry for keeping the truth from me and for lying for so long. For a second, I actually believed him, and I started to feel hopeful again, like maybe this was the start of us actually talking again, and a step toward fixing things. I was about to bring up how I had been doing some research online about other options for us when he kept going, and it became obvious what he really wanted. He told me about yet another stupid work party, and how this one was apparently more important than all the others, and that I needed to be there when he met some of the higher executives. He was essentially apologizing just so I wouldn't look upset or angry at the party and ruin whatever perfect married life image he presented at his work. His apology wasn't for me, it was for himself and his reputation. That realization cut very deep. I was hoping we'd get around to actually talking about what happened and how hurt I felt. But he didn't even want to take accountability or acknowledge how much he had messed up. I hated it, but I still agreed to go. At the time, I told myself it was easier than fighting about it. What else was I supposed to do? Say no and have another screaming match that went nowhere? I swallowed it down despite how awful I was feeling, and I said yes. But what I should have done was have the fight with him. I should have said no because that night ended up being the biggest mistake of my life. The party was huge, and the place was full of people. It was some kind of special end-of-the-year thing that his company did. I didn't care enough to really ask for details. I was beyond uncomfortable, but Derek slipped right into it. It was like he put on a mask. He'd literally been begging me not to make a scene in the car or look angry. He'd even promised that we could talk once we got back. But the second he slipped into the hall, he was suddenly smooth and charming, shaking hands and making jokes like he didn't have a care in the world. He looked happy and like everything was great while I was left to stew in my resentment. I stood beside him the whole time, plastered on fake smiles and nodded at conversations that I didn't give a shit about. I did what he wanted, and I played the role of supportive wife in front of all the old men he was trying to suck up to. But the longer I stood there with him, the worse I felt. I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it was for him to be this version of himself with strangers and colleagues, while I was left with the distant, dismissive, unapologetic version at home. Why did they get the warmth and the happiness while I got lies and secrets? Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, so I excused myself. I think I told him something about needing air and feeling cramped before I slipped outside. I just couldn't stand being in there for another second, and even though that night wasn't exactly cool, it still felt better than standing next to a man who felt like a stranger to me. I had held on for so long, I didn't even cry when he had finally told me the truth. I had always prided myself on being pragmatic and calm in times of crisis. Even after my fight with Derek, the first thing I did was go upstairs and start Googling options. I didn't let myself cry or have some useless emotional breakdown, but standing outside that hall, it all felt way too much for me. My eyes stung, and I tried to hold the tears back. I told myself I wasn't going to cry there. That was when Scott showed up. He was one of Derek's colleagues. I'd met him a couple of times, just in passing, and he always seemed polite enough, but we'd never actually talked. I was so caught up in how I felt that I didn't hear the door open, and by the time I noticed him, he had already seen me and the tears on my cheek. So he walked over and he asked if I was okay. Obviously, the last thing I wanted was to speak to anyone, so I told him I was fine, and that being in there was just a little too much. I thought that would be the end of it, that he would feel like he'd done his part by making sure I wasn't going to jump into traffic or anything, and now he could go back in. But he surprised me by coming closer. He said he felt the same, and that he hated the performative side of these parties, and the way everyone pretended to be someone they weren't. I couldn't help but think of Derek in that moment, and it made me laugh. He laughed too. Then I sat down on one of the steps, and he joined me. We didn't take much at first. We just sat together for a few moments, and the silence felt more genuine than any of the conversations happening inside. But eventually we did speak, though, after the silence had reached that point where it transitioned from comfortable to awkward. At first it was just boring small talk, but then we were out there so long that things eventually shifted. He told me about his frustrations at work and feeling of being stuck in a job that wasn't fulfilling for him. And I told him about how exhausting it was to always be the wife whenever Derek needed me. I kept all the other shit going on between us to myself, obviously. We talked for a good while. He was easy to talk to and handsome. The second part is always known, but hadn't ever really acknowledged. I'd had a few glasses of champagne inside, but I was far from drunk, just a little tipsy. So I noticed when somewhere along the way, the tone changed. Our conversation became a little more flirtatious and teasing, and I allowed it. I'm not sure what I was doing or why I let it slide. I just did. I wasn't thinking clearly that night, probably because I didn't want to think at all after what Derek had put me through. So when his hand brushed against mine and then stayed there, I allowed that too. He complimented my looks and dress, and it shouldn't have affected me, but it did. I should have stopped it there. I should have walked away or gone back in, but I didn't. I was angry, a little drunk, and in need of a distraction. I wanted something for myself, something reckless and selfish. I wanted it because I felt it was only far after Derek got to be selfish and careless. When he put his hand on my thigh, I didn't push it away. I leaned into his space and the conversation slowly faded away. We kissed. It was messy and passionate, and I let it happen. It didn't stop there, though. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were in the bathroom, fumbling with our clothes. The whole thing was a blur of sex and adrenaline. I barely even remember it. I was more caught up in how intoxicating it felt to do something so dangerous than actually doing it. I rationalized it by telling myself it was revenge and a way of getting back at Derek for being so selfish and ruining my plans. I told myself I deserved one night where I wasn't the wife who waited and sacrificed what she wanted just so she wouldn't seem too intense. In that moment, I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about anything but the rush of doing something I knew would devastate him if he ever found out. I knew I would never let him find out, but it was enough for me right then just to know that I had done it, that I had at least punished him in some way. It gave me a small but strong feeling of power. But amidst all that carelessness, I didn't tell Scott to use protection. I don't even think he had any condoms on him that night. We were both so irresponsible. The panic didn't hit me until I was in the back of the car with Derek, though. Heading home with him in that tense, suffocating silence made me realize just what I had done, and I started to freak out. What if something happened? What if this mistake became something bigger than just a secret? My stomach twisted into knots with fear, but I tried to calm myself down so Derek wouldn't notice something was wrong. He didn't even ask where I'd been the whole time, and I sure as hell wasn't offering any details. So I told myself it would be fine. Things with Scott had barely even lasted long enough, and he hadn't really come inside me, so I thought nothing would come of it. That's what I kept telling myself, over and over, even as the guilt started to creep in when we got home. Unsurprisingly, we didn't have the talk he promised me, and the guilt was quickly swapped out for anger. In a twisted way, I felt like I had finally evened the score between us. Derek had lied to me, stolen years from me, and had basically crushed my dream. He had acted selfishly, and I was the one paying the price. Now I had done something just as cruel, even if he never knew. And that thought, that sick feeling of balance restored between us, made it easier to maybe forgive him eventually. I thought maybe now I could move forward and rebuild what we had now. I thought we had both gotten our hits in and could continue on with a clean slate. I was wrong, though, because weeks later the nausea started. I brushed it off at first, blamed it on stress or just my stomach acting up. But then it kept happening. The mornings were the worst, and soon enough my body felt different in ways I couldn't ignore. I felt tender all over and heavier, and the littlest smells made me feel like I was going to throw up. Panic really set in when I could barely go a few hours without needing to use the bathroom, and when I missed my period for the second month. I knew what it was before I even bought the tests, but I bought them anyway, just to be sure. I bought different brands from different stores, but the results were all the same. Every single one was positive. I locked myself in the bathroom for hours, and I remember thinking, there's no way this is real. This can't be happening. Not to me. Not now. The baby I had dreamed of for years, the one thing I had always wanted, and it wasn't from my husband. Instead, it was proof of my infidelity, proof of the one night I had stepped out of line. It would have been funny if it wasn't happening to me. I thought about ending it, about quietly marching myself to a Planned Parenthood, taking care of it and moving on, and burying the secret forever. But then I thought about what it really meant for me. I was finally pregnant. After all those years of waiting, after tracking cycles and marking dates, I finally had it. I was carrying the one thing I had wanted more than anything. How could I get rid of that? I mean, the circumstances were extremely less than ideal. But how could I give up the chance to finally be a mother? Especially knowing that it could probably never happen naturally with Derek. I started to tell myself it was a sign. A golden opportunity for our marriage and a second chance. I told myself that maybe Derek didn't need to know. Maybe this was fate's way of giving me what he couldn't, and we could just raise the baby as ours. He would think it was some sort of miracle, but I would know the truth. It was a crazy, desperate thought, and I knew that. But what other options did I have? I was still thinking about how to go about the whole thing when it all went wrong. 2 days later, the decision on what to do or how to go about it was taken away from me. I was folding laundry in the bedroom when he came in holding one of the positive tests I had been careless enough not to dispose of properly. He looked almost scared as he held it, and I knew in that instant that everything was about to come crashing down. He asked me what exactly he was holding in his hands, how it was possible he was holding a positive test in his hand after what he'd told me, and if there was something I was hiding from him. I opened my mouth and a dozen different lies came to my head. I could have said it was a friend's, that she came over and because she suspected so, we did it together. Or I could have said that the test was faulty and all the others had been negative. But the evidence of my betrayal was right there and there was no point in lying. If I did then, what would I tell him when my belly started showing in a few months, or when my feet hurt all the time? What I had done was right there, and there was nothing I could do except own up to it. There was nothing to do but confess. So I told him everything. I told him about the party, about my anger, and about Scott. That one thing had led to another, and it happened. I didn't hold back. I let it all spill out. And before he could cut me off, I rushed to present my desperate plan. I tried to convince him that this could be a good thing. We didn't have to tell Scott or anyone, and we could just keep it between ourselves, a secret that would allow us to get everything we had ever wanted. Not the way we wanted it, but the result was the same. We had a baby now. We could finally be a family. I was hoping he could look past my mistake, just for a moment, and see the possibility of saving our marriage and our shared dream. But he didn't look hopeful like I did. He looked disgusted, and he looked at me like I was a stranger. He told me that he was repulsed, not just by the fact that I had cheated on him, but by the fact that I could even suggest such a thing. He said he was disgusted that I had given myself to another man after only a few hours of conversation, and he was even more disgusted by my plan. He said that he could never forgive me for betraying him and humiliating him, and he could never, under any circumstances, raise another man's baby as his own. The idea that I even thought he would agree to it just showed how little I thought of him, how spineless, and what an excuse for a man I must have thought he was. His fear of me seeing him as less of a man had come true in his eyes. Then he said that there was no saving the marriage. He told me that the worst part of it all was the tiny bit of hope he had felt when he first found the test. He had allowed himself to believe, for a single second, that despite everything, it had worked out for us. He had walked into that bedroom with just a little hope, but the look on my face when he asked what I was hiding told him everything he needed to know. He said he knew, instantly, that he wasn't that lucky. He wanted a divorce and that there was nothing I could do to stop him. He was leaving and I could do whatever I wanted, raise the baby alone for all he cared, but he was done. He didn't listen when I begged him to stay, or to just think things through. He just packed a bag and left that night, and in the coming days, he didn't respond to my calls or texts. Days passed, and I started to think that I could do it on my own ebb if Derek had left. I didn't know how, but I had to. I had a baby to think about. But then, that's when Derek proved that he wasn't done with me yet. He had always been a private person, not a huge fan of social media, but he decided to use it as his way to ruin me. He posted a long rant about my betrayal on his personal page. He was extremely candid and open about all the details. His friends, mostly people from the finance world, saw it. I only saw it because a mutual friend had sent it all to me. It should have stayed in that circle. It should have stayed in a bubble that was far away from me, but it didn't. Someone took screenshots of all of it and posted it to another social media site, and it started to generate some buzz. It went viral, essentially, and suddenly all my information was out there. Derek hadn't left anything back because he was posting it to his close friend's story, but some overzealous idiot went and spread it all. Anyone who did a quick search of my name or his or Scott's would be able to get an even fuller picture. The scandal eventually made its way through our social circles and into our professional lives. Scott was fired. It didn't look good for the company not to get rid of him, and I was suspended from my job pending the results of an internal review. There was no actual review. I worked in the social media and marketing space, and my employees didn't want to deal with the drama and damage. My friends, many of them mutual friends with Derek, chose his side and suddenly became distant. My family was disappointed and ashamed. They couldn't understand why I would do something like that to him after years of us being together. No one could. But it was because they didn't know the real truth of what happened. I was left all alone, pregnant, and with no idea what I was going to do next. All I had ever wanted was a family, and in my desperate attempt to get it, I lost everything. I had no husband, an unstable job, and barely any friends. The baby I was carrying, the one I had thought would be my saving grace, was a constant reminder of the mistake that ruined my entire life. Now, I don't know where to go from here. I'm coming up on the end of my first trimester, and I haven't even spoken to Scott yet. He hasn't reached out to me either, so I guess he wants nothing to do with the baby, which is fine with me. Things are uncertain and messy now, in a way I never could have expected, but at least I got what I wanted finally. It honestly doesn't feel like enough after what I've lost, but I guess it'll just have to be. At the risk of sounding repetitive, what other choice do I have?